I'm Lloyd Holiday, and this is the Cost of a Thing podcast. Thanks for listening in today. So, what happened to that great standard of living that we used to enjoy here in America in the 1960s and even into the 1970s? Well, that's what the Cost of a Thing podcast is all about, and that's what I'm going to be talking about here. Okay, today I'm going to do another podcast on some of the things I remember from growing up in Southern California in the 1960s. And another thing I remember, the kids were like free range kids. You hear that term nowadays. We were not very old. Maybe 8 or 9, 10, and we would just range free in the neighborhood. Mom and Dad really didn't know where we were all day. We'd come home for lunch and certainly for dinner, but it wasn't like you had to tell them exactly where you were every second. You'd just be roaming around in the neighborhood, and everything seemed like it was safe. There was nobody worrying about getting kidnapped. I never heard of that. And you were free and easy. You just pop out the door and start playing with your friends, and there was lots of kids in our neighborhood. I know my family had 5 kids. Next door was a couple more kids. On the other side was 2 more kids, and 2 more the next house down, and 3 the next house down, several across the street. There was lots of kids in the neighborhood. It was always kids outside playing in the streets and in the yards. And you don't see that so much anymore. It seems like there's not as many kids now, or they stay in more. We didn't stay in. We went out. We were outdoors most of the day if we were home. There wasn't the worry of being kidnapped, like I said, or like moms worry nowadays. I don't know if it's because the news continually broadcasts those things or whatever. It was sure fun being a kid back then. And, a lot of times my brother and I, he was a few years younger than me, we just take off on our bikes and ride down quite often, go fishing, at the ocean. It was about a mile or so ride away, and we'd just pick up some bait and take our fishing poles. Maybe I'd be 9, 10, 11 years old. We just ride our bikes down there. We just fish all day off the pier. Or Mom would sometimes drop us off at the beach. I guess they had lifeguards. I don't really recall. They must have. But we were in that water all day long in the ocean, Pacific Ocean. We were in Southern California. We had a little, like one of these rubber things. They didn't have the kind of surfboard, like body surfer things they have now. Foam ones. They had rubber ones that you blew up. And mine was kind of a canvas one. And I remember my stomach was so sore at the end of the day from the sand getting between that thing when I'd be riding it in on the waves. So we did that a lot until we got good and tired of it. And if you look at some of the old 60s TV shows like Leave It to Beaver and Dennis the Menace, those were pretty good representations of what the neighborhoods were like in the 1960s and 70s. And you can see if you watch those shows, the kids just roamed around. The parents didn't really know exactly where those kids are. They might be downtown getting an ice cream cone or walking downtown to the movie. And they're not very old. Maybe some of them 9 years old, just take off alone or with their friends and go downtown. And that's how it was. Those shows are very close to reality that I remember. Or Mom would take and drop us off at the high school pool in the area. And it was a big pool with a low dive and a high dive. And we had gone down there to get swimming lessons. So we knew the pool pretty well after all the swimming lessons classes. So we loved to go down there. And like I say, we'd stay in that pool all day. It was probably a quarter to get in. And you'd just stay all day, and our eyes, from the chlorine would be just pink by the end of the day from opening our eyes underwater and diving. And swimming, and just, we were down there quite a bit at the pool. She dropped us off at the pool, as they say. She had to have a little time without us kids breathing down her neck every minute of every day. I mean, sometimes I would just take off and maybe there wouldn't be any friends around or anybody else around, and I'd just go out for a walk out in the farm fields. And around us, they grew strawberries and tomatoes, cabbage, lima beans, and there was the big lemon orchards in that area. And they were huge, and you could get lost in those lemon orchards, and it was like a forest of lemon trees. And they were not very big trees. I'd say they're about, at most, they get about 10 feet high and, 10 feet across. And they're kind of low to the ground, so you can't really see the trunk. And you just walk around in the lemon orchard. The farmers didn't have fences and stuff back then. This was in the mid-60s. There was no fencing around the orchards or any of the farm fields. Now I see they've got fences, and they don't want anybody getting in there and walking through the fields. They didn't care. They didn't care if us kids walked through there back then. At least there maybe wasn't as many of us, or I don't know why, but it was free range everywhere. You could just go anywhere. And I spent a lot of time walking around in the orchards out there, just looking for things, and I'd see, jackrabbits and different kind of birds, and it was a real interesting experience. Lizards, and I remember one time we even built a tree house up in one of the eucalyptus. They use these big eucalyptus trees for windbreaks, and they're real tall, and they're big trees, and there's a whole line of them. And one time we built a tree house up pretty high up in one of those trees. Farmer didn't care. Nobody cared. After a while, we just lost interest in it, and it kind of fell apart, and it was gone. But nobody tore the tree down or called the police because the tree was in there, or the tree house was in there. And then there was a train that came by right in that area by the orchards there, and it would go slow through our area most of the time, and sometimes we'd run alongside and jump on those little ladders and ride the train for a while. And Mom and Dad never knew we were doing that. I mean, if they did, they probably would have got mad, but nobody told them, and it's kind of fun. We'd just run along, and it was going, maybe 3 or 4 miles an hour when we'd do that, but we'd ride it for a ways, and then we'd jump off. And I don't know, we may have been 10, 11 years old around that time, or even a little bit younger. I remember, I had these little army men. You'd get them in the back of the comic books. And, they were like 1.5 inches high, these green ones, or there'd be blue and red ones from the Revolutionary War style, in different positions, holding the guns and stuff. And I'd order a bunch of those out of the back of comic books. And I'd take my big bag of those army men and some little tanks and equipment like that, little plastic stuff, and I'd go out in the back of our area. They had these little hills where they had piled all this dirt up from they were building something in the area, and the whole several acres, they just piled with one little hill after the next, rows of these little hills. I don't know, maybe 6 feet high or 5 feet high by 6 feet at the base, and it was a great place to go out and play army men. So I'd go out into those, and I don't know whose land it was, but nobody bugged us, nobody said nothing. We'd always be out there playing like it was our land, like it was open land, public land. But I'm sure somebody owned it. Nobody said a darn thing. They just said, let the kids play out there. So I'd play with my army men out there, and I'd set them up and throw some dirt clods at them and, blow them up like I was playing army. And one day, I was doing that, and I kind of laid back against one of the hills, and I fell asleep. And I don't know how long I was sleeping, probably just a few minutes. But I noticed some guy I woke up, and some guy was running at me from the road, which was a good, maybe 50 or 100 feet away, the little road, the paved road that went by. And he's coming at me, and he sees me wake up, and then he says, are you all right? He was an older guy, like a man, maybe 40 years old or something. And I says, yeah, I just fell asleep. I'm just a little kid. And he said, okay, just want to make sure you're okay. And I remember that. So, and I was out there all by myself, just playing out in the middle of nowhere in this field, and felt perfectly comfortable. I mean, I can't even, I'm trying to explain to you how there was no fear that anybody was going to bother me out there. Like, there was just, either I didn't even know about that kind of thing, or I just didn't have there was no fear of that in my mind. And certainly I never saw my parents express any care of that kind of thing. So it was really a great time to just be a kid and do what you wanted. Just about all the time we were doing what we wanted. And I told you that story. I'm trying to explain how totally comfortable in that environment I was and how safe I felt, that I would just lay back and fall asleep in the middle of a big field with no one around anywhere. I mean, just out there by myself, and just felt totally comfortable. And I just stood my head back and against that hill and like a little lounge chair, fell asleep. That's how comfortable I was. Not a worry about anything or any fear. And that's how it was as a kid back then. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. I mean, I think a lot of people had that experience that grew up back then, and maybe even some today do in certain areas. And, there was a lot of places you knew of as a kid where you could get stuff like candy and little toys or ice cream bars, or, you knew where there was stores within, I don't know, maybe half a mile away. And so we'd either walk or we'd ride our bikes down there. And they had the drive-through dairy at that time where cars would drive through. So we'd pull up on our bikes, and the dairy, they had everything. They had the like Hostess fruit pies and all those different Hostess, cupcakes and snowballs and all those things to eat. Anything, ding dongs, whatever they had them. And you'd go there, and they had all the different kinds of ice cream bars. So if you had a little money, you could go down there and get anything you wanted, all the candy you wanted. And sure, we'd go down there all the time and get that stuff. Didn't do probably our teeth any good. Luckily, I still have my teeth. I've had a few cavities, and it probably was from that. When I was a kid, I had quite a few cavities. But we'd go to all the little stores around. There was a little drugstore you could go to maybe a mile away, and we knew all those places where we could get an ice cream cone. There was a drugstore that would serve ice cream cones. 5 cents for one scoop, 10 cents for 2 scoops, 15 cents for 3 scoops in a cone. They had 15 different kinds of ice cream there. Every chance I could get, I was down there getting an ice cream or whatever I wanted there. And of course, they had all the other snack stuff too in that drugstore. And Mom didn't know where we were. She didn't know we were down at the store. A lot of times we'd go there, then we'd go over to some kid's house we know, or go over to somebody else's house. But by the end of the day, we were back home to have dinner. They just didn't keep track of us. And maybe they should have a little more, but it was kind of great as a kid, as I think back, to be able to do that. And I think that's lost today. Everybody's more afraid. They're afraid their kid's going to get kidnapped or molested, or something's going to happen to them. So they got to keep track of them really closely. I don't see kids just running around like that. Once in a while in town, I do see a kid like that, and I go, well, there's a kid doing like we used to do, And there they are, a couple of boys riding their bikes. So some of them are still doing that, but certainly not in the big cities, I don't think, as much. Of course, I didn't live right in a highly populated city. But I think it's something that's been lost, and it's a sad thing to see that not there anymore. And I'm sure if you go back even further into the 40s, people that grew up in the 30s and 40s, maybe they even had more freedom than I did. Maybe they just, were able to do anything. There was less worry maybe, and there was more area to roam over and more out in the country, things like that. But I know our kids, we didn't let them just go out and do that. We had to know. I had to know where they were because I was a little worried about it, you know. But and maybe I think because maybe our parents had so many kids, maybe they didn't worry. They figured, well, if one, I mean, I don't know if they thought that at all, but if one disappeared, well, I still got a whole bunch left. Whereas today, people only have one or two kids, and you got everything in that one basket, so you got to be a little more careful with it. I don't know if that's it, but maybe subconsciously there was some of that. Thank you for listening in today, and until next time, this is Lloyd Holiday signing off.